Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts broadcast today. We are very pleased to have Coach Carolyn Maguire here talking about social emotional learning in the time of COVID. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you'll receive about an hour after the live broadcast. For those of you listening in replay or podcast mode, please visit the webinar replay page on the Attitude website, www.attitudemag.com/podcast-324/ for access to both the accompanying slides and the Certificate of Attendance option. Now for today's topic. Social distancing has isolated and stressed all of us, but it has caused children with ADHD to lose valuable opportunities to practice their social skills and make and keep friends. Many school administrators and teachers are hard at work implementing programs to address social emotional learning during distance learning, but parents can also do many things at home to strengthen their kids' social skills, which leads to not only emotional well-being, but also better academic performance. ADHD expert and coach Carolyn Maguire will supply us with strategies to meet all of these challenges. Caroline founded and facilitates a comprehensive social emotional learning training methodology, #Connection Matters, for adults, parents, clinicians, and academic professionals on how to develop critical social, emotional, and behavioral skills in themselves and in others. Caroline's book, Why Will No One Play With Me?, is a playbook that includes foolproof scripts on how to communicate with anyone in any situation and how to ensure the message registers with the recipient. You can ask questions of Caroline during her presentation, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can after she finishes. That all being said, I'll turn it over to Caroline. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I want to add that I am a parent, so I have two children, and we are, all in different states throughout the country and throughout the world in terms of where we are. And where you are today may not be where you are in 2 months in terms of social distancing, virtual, hybrid models, in school and at home. So I'm designing the information here for parents so that you can help your child with this social piece, no matter what their current status or future status. And so I want to start by saying, there are so many things going on, and I think it's so challenging for kids. But I think there are opportunities, even at home, even in quarantine or even in social distancing, to strengthen kids' social skills. And so I don't deny that there's a social crisis and that we really miss, the contact that we had before. But I do feel passionately that we can use this time and we can support our children. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is really how we can support anybody who is struggling socially. So first, let's start by talking about learning in quarantine or in social distancing. One of the things I would suggest, if you haven't already, is bringing back dinners together, because dinner time conversation is an absolutely fabulous way to help a child who maybe doesn't make chit chat easily, doesn't give more than a one-word answer, doesn't flesh out details, or even doesn't really tell a tight story, right? Many of us with ADD, we tell these long meandering stories. So there's an opportunity to set a goal as a family from anyone in the family to try to work on those conversation skills and have those conversations together a couple nights a week. And I love to set goals as a family and sort of openly talk about the things that we all would love to work on. And you as adults pick something too, right? So not just the kids. The other thing is that listening is a key skill, right? So one of the things that we can work on during this time of social distance is our listening skills and our kids' listening skills. And I'm going to talk today about how you teach these social skills, how you get your kid on board, all of that. But starting out saying, if your child struggles to read cues and body language, it's very tough right now on video, but we can still use video and Zoom and the home family to build that skill. I have many families I work with where we set the goal that the kid is going to, read the parent's body language and not just hear the words, and that the parent is going to prompt the young person like, hey, what am I thinking right now? So that skill improves even if they are not in school and interacting mostly over video. The other thing is that a big hurdle for ADHD folks socially is self-regulation as emotional regulation. So one of the things we can also do while we're home is to work on those emotional and self-regulation coping skills so that your child goes back to whatever school setting and social setting with a better toolkit. One of the things that we're going to talk about today also is how do we translate that experience from the virtual world back into the in-person world. Many of the introverts and inattentive types that I work with are doing great with the virtual world. They're bolder, they feel empowered, while others are really struggling to reach out. So we're going to talk about that today and just a little bit about how do we translate this all back into the in-person world and how do we build these skills. So let's just briefly touch on what we know, which is that being in this social distance, being in these situations, it can be very harmful for kids socially. We know that loneliness is absolutely on the rise. And I want to just briefly touch on why, because I think as parents, it's really important that we step into our kids' shoes and really come to understand what's going on for them. What is it like for them? Many of my families that I work with or people who write me from all over the world tell me that they ask their kid to do certain things and they give good advice and they get a lot of resistance. So I think it's important in order to overcome this resistance that we realize what we're asking of this kid and why this child with ADHD may be resisting you a little. So if your child has a thin social network, I call it, where a lot of their people that they are with are really acquaintances and they don't have a really stable friend group, then the social dynamics right now are absolutely even more in flux because they're being asked to reach out to and engage with in the virtual world kids that they may not know that well. So when you ask them to reach out to someone, or many parents will tell me that they set a goal of, please be social twice a day, please text or reach out, you're getting this big resistance. And a lot of times part of it is that, the kid or teenager may not tell you that they have a very thin social network, but we're asking them to reach out to someone they don't know that well. The other thing is that a lot of times because kids feel very isolated, you may see them not being treated well by friends, and they kind of stick with the people who aren't necessarily treating them as well. one of the ways we make friends is by having friends by sort of proximity, the people in our clubs, the people in sports. And that's a way that we want to nurture friendship and bridge between an acquaintance and a real relationship. But we've canceled a ton of after school activities and clubs. And many schools that are doing virtual learning or hybrid learning, kids may be potted or put with kids that they don't know. And so for them, if they don't have the best outreach skills and social skills, we're asking them to reach out again to people they don't know that well. The other thing is, in many school districts, there's no sort of formal lunch, no cafeteria. Now, I have some kids who are pretty excited about that because they didn't love going to lunch or the cafeteria. But, it is also a factor here in bumping into people and making those friends by proximity. If you don't have lunch, you don't have that opportunity. And the final thing is that it's come to my attention, a lot of tweens that I work with and teenagers have said to me that one thing they're struggling with is that there's different understanding of risk with COVID-19, and that some kids are engaging in unsafe behaviors or what the teenager would consider higher risk behaviors. And so this is why a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is engaging with your kid and actually having them tell you what's going on and communicating with them, because we may be asking them to reach out to people and they're resisting, and there's some resistance because they don't feel comfortable with the way that kid is social distancing. One of the biggest things we want to do in terms of helping kids build new social behaviors is to help them witness the social world and how it works. So when you're talking to your child, if they don't have a great grasp of the social world, or they don't understand exactly what's expected, and maybe they don't have the best of understanding people's perspectives, one of the best ways to help them shift their mindset and be more engaged in the social world is that we help them witness more and reflect more on the social world. So one of the techniques I'm going to teach you today in terms of communication will allow you to help your child reflect more on the social world, and will be less about you telling them. So instead of saying, you can't have friends if you don't join anything, I'll be asking you to use questions and actually, ask them what they think will help them in terms of reaching out more, or what is it that they didn't like about a particular opportunity. And that way they start to think about the social world more. The more we can help our children sort of understand things, instead of telling them, the less resistance we'll get. And for kids who don't want to engage in this social process with you, and believe me, I have many clients who tell me that if I mention the word social, we're done. They're walking out the virtual door. I would say to you that this technique is a great way, because instead of directly talking to them about things that need to change, you're more partnering with them, and it's a slower process, but it's a much easier process in the sense that they're going to be less resistant to just even the words, social change. I want to mention that, connection is a verb, right? So the process to connect with people, the process to engage with people is a verb, and it requires action, right? We have to, develop the skills necessary. We have to engage with other people. We have to interpret their social cues. We have to build relationships by being with people and talking to people, and we have to nurture those relationships. And a lot of the traits that come with ADHD make it harder for us to do those steps. So if you think about your child and you think about what might be getting in their way of having deeper relationships during COVID, one of the things I would say is to think about, which of those pieces they struggle with, and then to think about helping them with that piece, even if it's the social skill building over this period where we're not necessarily doing the traditional social routes. And that way, when they return to an in-person situation, they will have strengthened these skills. The process to become friends, I just want to mention this, right? One of the things that happens with teenagers and kids with ADHD is that they really rush in often to friendship and exhaust people, or they might actually not spend the time and do the outreach and sort of the action steps towards becoming a friend. And so when I talk about friendship, we meet a potential friend. We think about how our relationship with them or how, their interests are similar and different than our peers. We engage in small talk. So right there, that might be something that your child struggles with. We try to learn more about them. That goes back to the listening, right? We have to be good listeners and we have to engage with people. We share information about ourselves. I have some kids that I'm working with right now where they don't share anything about themselves. But one quick tip is that your mask, your T-shirt, the things you wear when you're on Zoom or the things you wear to an in-person school can show people what you're interested in and help you find people with shared interests. One of the big aspects here is to try to share common interests with people and experiences. And I know that many of our kids with ADHD have struggles joining things. And that's where, again, we're going to build sort of that social mindset and help them to look at what do I, find interesting? Who would I find interesting? And then slowly ease into them joining things. And we see potential friends and we see them hopefully enough so that we would bridge from this shared experience to actually seeing each other in activities. So if you think about the time we're in right now and social distance, if we, ask a teenager or a young person to reach out and go through this process, and they don't have great confidence in themselves, it's sort of a longer process and there's a lot of skills involved. So that's where I go back to, we're going to want to build those skills and help them. And I'm going to talk in a second about how to get them on board so that you can help them. I want to just mention the steps to help a child learn new social skills, right? So one of the big things is that we have to sort of pave the way, right? So many kids resist because they have a story or a mindset that might not serve them socially, right? They don't want to join things, or they'll say to you that they're fine the way they are, or you hear them, having a behavior, on a video game where they're screaming at everyone and you worry they're alienating other kids. All of those things kind of go back to this mindset. And that's one reason I'm going to teach you the coaching technique with open questions and reflective listening in a minute, so that you can help your child reflect and think about their social mindset. The other piece is paving the way. So a lot of times kids might not be willing to work with you. And what I would say to you is that I had clients who spent the entire quarantine period from March to June that parts of the country just went through, paving the way and rebuilding their relationship with their child. And what they did was to do things that are fun and not about homework, not about school, and not about these sort of lightning rod topics with their child. And they worked on communicating differently, getting that relationship to a better place, and also sharing their own struggles and their own concerns and having that more collaborative discussion. Now, a lot of times parents want to skip this sort of paving the way step. But what I would say to you is that when we want someone to engage with us It's much easier if we've done the paving and we've done the things to help them shift their mindset before we just jump into, actual skill building. We want to have those collaborative conversations and improve your understanding of their social world. So the more we can understand about what's going on for them, the more we can be their partner. And that might be getting the perspective of siblings and coaches and teachers, but it also might be hearing from them and giving validation to what's hard for them. And then we want them to have an image to navigate toward, right? They need to have that observation and practice of the social experience. So one of the things we can do is we can ask them when they go on Zoom or when they're engaged in playing these video games, tell me about the culture. Tell me about the social norms of this group, right? Tell me about what's going on in this group. And to look at in a fun way what's going on and have those sort of dinner time discussions. And you will help them look at, who has these positive social images, who has the image that they want to go toward. Because even in the virtual world, we're still having, something to navigate toward. There's still people on Zoom navigating it better than others. And then practice and learn, right? So that's the process of changing social, is that we help your child practice and learn. We want to translate any wins that we have in the virtual world to the real world. So I have many clients who are more inattentive ADHD. They might be more introverted or shy, and they are doing great with this idea of reaching out and doing a Google Hangout or doing, watching a Netflix show and chatting with people, because it's not as bold as walking up to someone in the hallway and introducing yourself. And one of the things that came to me really early on in the COVID is that what we have to do is build that confidence and then translate these wins back into the real world. So one of the things I did with a lot of kids like this is we set some goals. Who are the people that they really enjoy at school, but maybe they were not bold enough to go beyond a hi, how are you? Or maybe they had trouble being as forward or asking the person to do something over the weekend. And one of the things we did was we looked at who's on these chats, who's on these larger calls and Zoom things, and what's an excuse to reach out to them outside this, larger Google Hangout or whatever. A lot of these kids told me that it was much easier for them to join a chat or join a group than it would have been in person. And there are a lot of online communities. One thing I found is that, part of what forms friendship is to have a place where like-minded people come together and you share an experience. And one of the positive things that's, I think, happening this fall is I've found that there's much more of that kind of thing popping up within school districts, but also popping up just within the world. So if your child, is willing to engage with you in this, and they might be willing to, look at something that they're interested in, what I'm finding is that we can find an online group within their school and their community, or, in the larger community, where they can find people who are interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons, for instance. One of the things we also have been working on is that they would interpret social cues on Zoom and in other virtual forms. So we talk about the culture, we talk about the social norms. I ask them to sometimes hang back a little bit and observe, and then we talk about it after. And I have them test, and this came right from one of my teenagers. He said, please tell the parents that they need to have the kid test the social norms out and figure out kind of what flies and what doesn't. So I told him I would put this in the slide, and so I did. So when we're thinking about translating some of these social skills back into the in-person world, I think it's really useful to have a conversation and to think about what are the things for your child that are difficult about this online world, and then what are the things that are probably difficult about the in-person world. And one of the things I've found is that a lot of times kids will tell me that they can actually decipher the sort of social norms and unspoken rules of the virtual world, but not the in-person world, or vice versa. And one of the things I encourage them to practice, I always say to people, pick one thing to work on. And every time you enter either a real door or a virtual door, think of that as sort of your intention and center yourself and do something to sort of think about what your intention is. And then to take a bird's eye view of the situation, right? To look at what's the group, what's the dynamic, and what's your role in the group. This is not easy for kids with ADHD. I know that. And so this might take time before they can do this. I also find it feels really uncomfortable to us because we're convinced that the beats that we're taking are being noticed, and people, think that we're observing or somehow noticing that we're observing. But what I would say is if you can, sort of make a little game of it and have your child try this, it actually is not something people are going to notice. And it allows them to sort of take that bird's eye view and look at, what is the culture here? What are the norms? What do I know about these people? I talk about in Why Will No One Play With Me, taking sort of an inventory about the people who are in a situation and thinking about what you know about them. And then, how do you step into their shoes? How will they receive your messages? What are their likes and dislikes? What hot buttons do they have? I hear from kids a lot during this virtual schooling that they get into trouble. And so we sit down and we look at their professor or their teacher and step into their shoes and think about, what are their hot buttons? What do they like? I was hearing from one of my own kids today that their teacher has teapots in the background. What are those little signs and what do they tell you about that person? The other thing that I notice is something we need to translate back into the in-person world is making small talk. And part of this is that we have to bridge from, hi, how are you, to these deeper conversations. So that's why I go back to dinners and talking and role playing and practicing. And one of the things I found is that some of the kids who really struggle with this small talk, they do very well at this small talk in the virtual world because they find it a little less, of a big ask than if they were in person having to make this small talk. But again, it's a learned skill. We're adding a thought to every conversation we have and building a larger conversation. And then we want to help build bonds and relationships outside the online community. Research shows that when kids actually text and reach out and chat outside of a larger online community, they actually do bridge toward friendship. So we want to help your child nurture those relationships, which translated back in the real world. Think about, if you're on a committee, if you like someone, and find them interesting at work, one of the ways you bridge to real friendship is to, send them a message or call them or talk to them outside of the actual committee or workplace. So I really hope that one of the things that everyone sort of thinks about is the way that kids are experiencing things nowadays. Their world is changing constantly. They have a lot of uncertainty, and they're also being told a lot of rules and things that they have to do. And very few people are getting their perspective on things. So one of the things you can do to get your child more on board with talking about social and have it be less of the elephant in the room is to shift your communication better. A lot of parents have reached out to me and they'll say, I give good advice. No one takes my advice. And I'm totally sympathetic to that. One of the ways to shift your communication and sort of get better results is to start by using open-ended questions. The beauty of open-ended questions is that they encourage your child to talk candidly, and they use words like who, what, how. So you could literally say, how come? How come is one of the greatest questions of all time. What happened? And instead of going into telling mode, you would stay in this open question mode. Now, some kids have a hard time answering open questions, or you're going to get more of a fine, right? And I have a technique for that. Don't worry. But the idea here too is that you would ask them. So, if you have a child and they're friends with people that you don't love and you feel like they're being treated badly, instead of going into telling them how you think they're being treated, this would be a technique where you ask them, what's enjoyable about this friendship? What do you like about it? What do you think friendship should feel like? And you're giving them this opportunity to reflect on things and reflect on the social world and to hear their perspective. Maybe there's things about that friend you don't know, versus you telling them. The other thing about this technique is you get a lot of truthful information. There's something about it where you actually hear your own statements when someone asks you an open question. So I always say you sort of float above your body and you hear yourself saying something, and it allows your child to sort of self-evaluate their own statements. I had a young woman I was working with this summer, and she had some friends who weren't treating her necessarily well, but she was convinced that in this time of COVID, how would she make more friends? And we didn't tell her to make friends. We asked her questions about what was going on and what she liked about the friendships. And we had discussions about, what other folks she might like. And that led her to start thinking about, maybe looking for additional friendships. So, it really does promote that reflective piece that we talked about earlier that you want to do in order to help your child shift the way they're thinking about the social world. The other piece that is just really easy and you can use even in the heat of the moment, even when you're struggling a little bit, is this thing called reflective listening. And all it is to sort of repeat back or encapsulate your child's statement. And what it does is it confirms information. It clarifies some things. Maybe you didn't understand the situation fully. Maybe you thought something was happening that's not. It also makes people feel very validated and very heard. And so one of the things that, many of you may be facing is that your child is shut down socially. I know one of my clients who's a teenager told me that, I know, Caroline, you want me to have a plan. I know you want me to get up on time. I know you want me to create structure. But since we're all in this online world, I don't see the point. And instead of sort of going into tell mode, to just repeat that back, right? So you don't see the point in having any structure because we're in this online world. And what ends up happening is the kid feels really heard, but they also start to bridge from there. So if you have a kid who doesn't give you, a lot of information, you can also say to them, I want to sort of figure out what's going on. And I'm going to reflect to you what I think is going on. And often when you're wrong, then they'll start to tell you and you get more information out of them, which is a lovely thing. One of the big executive function skills, and executive function is the management system of the brain, that really I touched on is this metacognition, this bird's eye view of any social situation. And this skill is really key in social. And what you can do is ask your child questions and use reflective listening in order to help them take that bird's eye view. So rather than telling them that they're missing the beat, or they're not thinking about the future, or they're not remembering who this person is from the past, you can actually just ask them questions. What do you know about this teacher and what they feel about not turning in assignments? What do you know about this person and how things have been in the past? And to really take the bird's eye view, what's going on here? If instead of saying, you're really loud on video games, you're screaming at everyone, I think that you're alienating people, just to sort of ask them, like, what do other people do? What's the situation in the video game? And have them take that bird's eye view and have them take a look at it rather than you telling them. Because what ends up happening when you tell them is they tend to, become resistant and sort of, tell you don't understand. So in all situations, in academics, in, if they're, having some behaviors you think are alienating, if you feel like they're looking at things through an emotional reasoning lens and not necessarily seeing things the way they are, you can just help them through questions and reflective listening to take this bird's eye view. The other question that came up a lot, so I wanted to make sure I talked about it in this webinar, is that a lot of parents are concerned that while we've been in these different states of social distance, that their child isn't necessarily showing empathy, and that they're not necessarily showing stepping into people's shoes. Maybe they're rude to you. Maybe at home they just seem to really lack this empathy. Well, there's a few things at work here. I think a lot of kids are kind of, unhappy, and they're not necessarily having the emotional skills to cope with everything that's going on. But again, instead of telling them that, they're rude or that you think that they aren't stepping into people's shoes, one of the things you can do is to have it be a regular part of your life to talk about what's going on in your friend's life. What do you notice about this person's reaction to the situation? Ask your child, how they think you feel about their behavior. What do you think I feel when you yell at me? And then also helping them to think about other people's state of mind. Again, if you do nothing else for the next 6 months, but help them reflect on other people's states of mind, you'll have built an incredibly powerful emotional intelligence skill. And so, you can do it in a way where you're talking about other people's state of minds and you just use those open questions. What do you think is going on for them? What facial expressions do you notice? And that will build that muscle, because I don't think that our kids are lacking empathy, and I don't think that they mean to be rude. But I think that they have a struggle right now in that their lives are kind of in upheaval. So the more we can build that emotional intelligence muscle, the more we can help them think about other people's states of mind, the more we will really help them navigate the social world, because that's really a huge piece of it, right? To navigate the social world, you have to understand the social world. So the more we ask questions, the more we help our kids reflect on that. I wanted to just touch on how to find friends in social distance, because I know that this is a key question for parents. And one of the things that I would say is to go to your school systems, go to the colleges, and look into online clubs, communities, school groups. Many nonprofits are putting out these kinds of things, churches, etc., and to see if you can find a place where your child can connect with people who are like them, people who share their common interests. The other thing is that sometimes if your child is a person who isn't going to share a lot of information, I find siblings, cousins, and coaches and teachers can also be great sources of information in terms of, I don't know why they won't join this club, but this is the place for them. And then you can use your collaborative conversation skills and communication that we talked about to sort of help them to think about joining that club. And a lot of times, because it's online, they might actually be willing to engage in it. I know a lot of kids have sort of lost some of these opportunities where sports and things are canceled. And so that's where I would love you to partner and think about what could they do instead. I also say that if a kid needs to practice social skills and you want them to have an arena to practice in, cousins, close friends of the family, other sort of organized communities can be a great place for them to practice. Kids are having virtual play dates. I get a lot of funny stories from the kids I work with about these virtual play dates, but we still actually have discussions about shifting and roles. And so it's not, a bad thing to have a virtual play date if you have a younger kid, and then actually to talk about it, and what the kid got out of it, and why was it harder? Why was it, what was going on there? And then I would say that there are, small group activities even online that are offered where kids can find people of similar interests. There's even online courses where they're doing robotics and things that are being offered, where kids are finding communities to do the things that they really enjoy and to meet people. And again, if we practice these skills, even in social distance, then it'll be easier to go back to the in-person world and join robotics or, join student government or a club. And so I think there is real benefit, even though we are in a really tough time right now, of them practicing and working on these skills in social distance. I'm seeing a real difference for kids. And I just want to mention that if you go to my website, CarolineMaguireAuthor.com, I have a bunch of videos, free information, and a video on how to play games with your child and build their self-regulation skills. Back to you, Wayne.
Thanks. That was excellent, Caroline. Really, really very good. We've had a lot of comments from people saying just that. One question, do these suggestions and strategies also apply to elementary school kids? A lot of parents have come wondering, is it just about teens, or do some of these also apply to younger kids?
I absolutely think they apply to younger kids. Actually, I think with younger kids, sometimes it's a little easier to persuade them. But what I'm seeing throughout the world actually is that younger kids are joining things, and we can also do a lot with younger kids at home. So one of the things I've talked about a lot since March when this started is that you can be a foil and you can work on a lot of these skills with younger kids, even if they, don't do well on Zoom and they don't do well with virtual play dates. If you have conversations with them, if you play board games with them and work on self-regulation, those skills are going to grow and blossom. So I actually think younger kids, sometimes it's a little easier to work on the skills even without social opportunities, because they are going to grow them even just working with you.
Mm-hmm. Several parents have asked, one is a 5th grader, the other one is a 10-year-old. I guess that's almost, fourth grader, maybe 5th. Anyway, they said their kids have reached out to try to make friends. And in one case, the child has been rejected. In another case, he reaches out to potential friends, and friends don't reach out to him, and parents can't figure out what it is that other kids don't seem to like about their child. So basically the answer is, how do you keep encouraging them after the rejection to keep reaching out to make friends?
Well, first, I'm sorry that they've experienced that. That's so hard. I would say one of the first things I would want to do as a parent is to reach out to teachers and find out before, we went into this time, what was going on for this child socially. Are there things that they're doing that might alienate people? Or is it just that they don't have a close enough friendship with these kids, or the kids are young enough that they're not engaging with each other? I would want to know that. I wouldn't tell the kid that, but I'd want to know just so that I could work on those skills. The other thing, too, is that I love having, fifth graders, fourth graders is a great age to sort of talk about, the social landscape, who they know, and to start helping them. I call it the flavors of friendship, to think about, who are your acquaintances, and to look at, what does it mean to have a real friendship, and what does it mean to have an acquaintance? What does it mean somebody you say hello to? And this is all in my book, While No One Play With Me. And then to sort of try to figure out, are they reaching out to the right people? Because one of the common things I see with kids is that they reach out to someone with whom they have almost no contact, and then they're rejected, which is heartbreaking. But they're not rejected because, of any specific reason, except that they're not really, the person doesn't even really know who they are. So I think one of the things I would do to encourage a child is to look at, who are they interested in? And I would help them to join some things so that they can stay encouraged, because opportunity is key. And like I said, look at what skills need to be built. Reach out to the teacher from last year and find out what was going on.
Mm-hmm. At the magazine, we sometimes ask our audience questions, who are your best friends? And oftentimes, for adults and kids, their best friends are people with ADHD. So one mom has asked, would it be helpful for social skills if, for instance, her son gets together on Zoom with other kids with ADHD, either a one-on-one or two or three other kids, just to build some confidence, because they might all sort of be, on a similar level.
Yeah, Wayne, it's so interesting. I love that idea. My clients have long said that they wish that they could be together, even though they're all over the world.
Yeah.
And I think that, we want our kids to have positive social models. So we want them to have, kids who are different from them and who show them sort of the social model. But I also think there's something to be said also for the fact that everybody with ADHD is not the same. So within that group, there could be kids who have some strengths your kids doesn't have, and vice versa. I think it would be beautiful, because I think A, we're a lot of fun, and B, there's something really nice about that connection and knowing you're not alone. So I absolutely, if that parent can facilitate that, I think it would be lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. That sort of struck a chord with me. Another parent said that your whole thing about children burning out other kids is very true for his daughter. And he wanted to know, it was actually a dad, he wanted to know how he can somehow help this situation so his daughter doesn't burn out potential friends. That's a tough one.
No, it's an excellent question, though. So, yes, it is a common ADHD trait that we sort of exhaust our friends, and there's a bunch of reasons for it. Sometimes we overshare, sometimes we rush in, sometimes we don't notice other people's feelings, and we never ask them about themselves. And so one of the ways that this dad can help is to sort of look at, his daughter's friendships, and to look at it with her and think about what is it that does exhaust people and sort of burn out the friendships, and then work on those, usually they're emotional regulation skills, right? And help her look at, what is friendship? What do people want and expect? And then build those skills, right? That's why I wrote While No One Play With Me, because I wanted parents to have the lessons to build those skills. Because what I find is when I look at this with kids, sometimes they even know they're doing it, but they just don't have the self-regulation skills to kind of hold back. So I think the dad could be a beautiful partner for his daughter. And with, don't directly say you burn out friends, but just look at, what do people like and how do they feel? I was with a group yesterday where some people were shouting at each other about politics. No one really likes that, right? And with kids, it's not shouting about politics. It might be shouting about a video game, but people don't like that. So we have to help them look at the social world and step into people's shoes, which he could do beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. A mom asks, if you have a child who has ADHD and a speech and language development delay, how do you help with his social skills when speech is difficult to understand? That's a tough one.
Actually, Wayne, it's interesting. It is a tough one, but I happen to have a little person like that at home. And so I've spent a lot of time developing my skills around this. So first off, the mom can feel free to reach out to me. Secondly, what I would say is one of the things we want to do with a kid with a language delay is use a lot of visuals and a lot of pictures, because they may not answer your question. There may be a lag in their response, but they will respond to pictures and, showing them different things. The other thing is that we have to just give them a little more time. One of the great things that someone professional taught me is things like sharing. When a kid has a speech and language delay, or even they're just really young, we can share with them and ask them if they'll share their special dinosaur or whatever with us. And we hold it for 5 seconds and we remind them of something they want. You really want to make popcorn next. You really want to watch your show. And we allow them to tolerate that 5 seconds, and then we give it back. And this builds that muscle. So even though we're at home, even though there aren't necessarily play dates in some cases, you can build that muscle even with a kid with a speech and language delay.
Mm-hmm. I like that advice. Yep. A couple of parents have brought up the fact that their child with ADHD doesn't have a lot of friends, and as a result, or who knows why, they're cyberbullied online during virtual school, and the parent is asking, how can I get help on this?
Well, it's terrible, and I'm so sorry that that's happening. One of the things that I was doing even just this week was alerting some school systems to this. And schools are very overwhelmed, but they also are very sympathetic to this. I would take screenshots and information about what's going on, and I would share it with the school so that they can help you. If you know the parents, you could reach out to the parents. But I also would talk to the child about how they feel. I would take protective measures with the school if necessary. And I would also think about, are there things in those messages that I can help the child with? For instance, I had a client where the messages through cyberbullying, and there's no excuse, but the messages were about, you interrupt everyone, you won't be quiet. So now I, as a parent, know maybe that's something I can help them with. So they're not as much of a target. But I would alert the school because it's not okay. And the sort of bullying world is right now more online, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. You brought up open-ended questions. I would say half a dozen parents said, what is the strategy to use when your child gives no answers or minimal info when asking open-ended questions? One parent said, his child, her child says, enough of the questions already after answering one. So I just wonder how, we've all been through that. Enough of the questions already. So how does the parent just be persistent? How do you get around that?
So I completely validate what they're saying. And I know that this is true. And I want to say I work with this every day. One of the things I would say is in some cases, I will have the parents talk to the kid about why they need that information. And in other cases, I'll also teach the parents to sort of have small, short 30-second conversations rather than long, drawn-out conversations, because you're going to get further. And in a lot of cases, I even say to the kid, Mom and Dad are going to have these short conversations, but when they have them, we have to engage in them, right? And we talk about why. Because in some cases, as parents, like, you need to know stuff, right?
Right.
And the other thing I do with some kids who really don't extrapolate or give me any information is that I sort of do either or, is it X or is it Y? And they might, give me a little more information by talking about that. There's also a third thing, which is that there are some kids who really just don't have the language skills to, extrapolate more, to say more, to give us more. And that, I think, is something that you may want to get them some help with, or you want to use another medium, right? Will they talk more when they're playing sports or video games, or, when they're engaged in something they enjoy? But I absolutely know this. And I would say, too, that's where a lot of parents, you one question, that's all you get. You don't get a bunch.
Right. Once again, a group of questions about their kids have low self-esteem, even rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And so one rejection and they won't reach out again. And once again, you might have answered this with the other one, but the low self-esteem issue is quite common, whether they have RSD or not. So any suggestions on dealing with the daughter to develop social skills, reach out to friends or potential friends who has low self-esteem?
Absolutely. I work with this a lot. And one of the things I would say is self-esteem comes from doing. And so the more we can give a kid a place to shine, a place to feel talented, a place to feel special, the more that the arena of their life where they may struggle is less pronounced, right? Because if you have no place where you feel good, then all you feel is bad, right? The other thing is that with the rejection sensitivity, that is entering fight, flight, or freeze, and it's an emotional regulation and feeling such an intense reaction. So we want to help that child look at that reaction, look at the intensity of the reaction, and have strategies to cope with that reaction, and actually preventative strategies, which will help her, because when you're experiencing that, I can say from personal experience, like you feel different and it really affects your self-esteem. So I think that, the more the parent can give this child a place to feel good and those coping strategies, the more she's going to be willing to try to do social things. And it may take time, right? It may take, a while before she feels good enough, but let's give her a place to feel good.
Mm-hmm. One last question, a quick one, because we're coming to the end of the hour. The mom wonders if there are any techniques for her son who interrupts a great deal. She says lately it's gotten worse, and it does affect potential friendships. Do you have any strategies for that?
Yes. So I have some Why Will No One Play With Me? I have a whole section on this, but what I would say to you is have conversations with him. Talk about the fact, that we need to work on the interrupting in a sensitive way using the communication techniques I've mentioned, and then have conversations where he goes back and forth with you on a topic. And when he starts to interrupt, have some kind of signal and work on the self-regulation piece of him realizing he's interrupting and trying to stay on topic. The more they practice back and forth, the more he'll start to realize it, and the more he'll start to learn strategies to mitigate it. It's a long-term journey, but it can actually get much, much better. And I giving a very high-level answer, but I have tons on my website about this.
Okay. Well, that was great. The hour is up, Caroline. really was quite enlightening and inspiring. Very, very good. I'm so glad you could do this.
Well, thank you so much. And everyone, hang in there. We're all in this together. And I know that things can get much better.
Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just wanted to thank everyone for being here again, and have a great day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.